Ooh, there we are. We're very
Hello.
live. So
So
live.
powerfully here. I feel
Okay.
so strong.
Welcome to the live stream, everybody. Thank you for being here. Those of you that may be watching, those of you that may be listening later, welcome as well. But Nathan and I are, if it's not super obvious, we're right here in the same space together, which is a funny thing to be able to do.
You can see if look, it's
There we are.
Justin.
Yeah, so we are going to, we've made everybody who's listening on our Discord wait entirely too long, so we're going to hop right into it. So, without further ado, welcome to Chapel Bell Curve, stats focused podcast about UJ football. I'm Justin.
And I'm Nathan.
And holy shit!
Well, that one's gonna get a crack on the audio.
Hey, Nathan, that was a really cool weekend, wasn't it?
It 100% was.
Yeah.
I have a lot of energy for this game,
Yes.
and I'm going to have to really work hard to contain myself.
I don't think I've ever heard you giggle as much as I've heard you giggle in the last couple hours as we've been setting this thing up. So it's been very fun for me just to hear you kind of like trudge around the room and go.
Yeah, I have a lot of energy, which is weird because I had zero energy after the end of the day, which I guess we can talk about that when we get into our subjective experiences. Yeah, so obviously, I mean, I think one of if not the biggest regular season win in Kirby Smart's tenure
Easily.
as UJ's coach. And yeah, so let's talk about it. We always start out these review episodes for every podcast is someone's first podcast. Every live stream is someone's first live stream. So we always start these out by talking about our experiences. And I was at the game, so I had a lot to talk about. But why don't you sort of walk us through how your day went first?
Yeah. I had my wife and I have both said many times now that this was a perfect weekend. She had Friday off, she had the day off as well because of Labor Day as a teacher, and so Saturday morning we woke up. I went on a run through Athens. It was very quiet because everybody's gone for the weekend, it seems. And then we got ready and we went to Atlanta to go see Hamilton. Only a year and a half later than we were supposed to do originally because we had tickets for April 2020 and it got postponed and it got postponed and got postponed. And so we finally got to go see it. It was absolutely incredible. If you haven't seen it, I definitely suggest it. It's outstanding, of course. It was great. We got back in time to go have some dinner with a couple friends, and then I watched the game in Athens, as one does. And it was just a really, really, really great time. I had a lovely time. By halftime, I was feeling real good. And
I can tell by your text.
yes, I was feeling real good. I had enough brown liquor for more than one Justin, essentially. And by the end of the game, I was feeling myself, and I said, "We need to go ring the bell right now." And so we ran down the road to the titular chapel bell, and I had enough brown liquor to where I couldn't logistically remember how to make the chapel bell ring, and I was being heckled by a bunch of middle-aged somethings, down with their beers, just staring at the chapel bell and reveling in its beauty. And here I come, trying to ring the damn bell, and I swung on it a few times, and it did not work. And for the life of me, couldn't figure it out. I don't know why. And I eventually just looked at it, and I kind of gave it my hand and said, "I've rung it before." And then we went home, and I demanded that we eat cinnamon toast. And so we ate some cinnamon toast and went to sleep. It was a great time.
That sounds pretty transcendent on your part. It feels like you really achieved your final form.
Easily. Yeah, absolutely. I'll go back and ring the bell sometime. It wasn't in the cards,
Yeah, absolutely.
What about you?
So obviously it was a pretty long day. Got up at about 6:30 and went over to Redcoat practice. I think started at 7:30, so we practiced for a couple of hours and left at about 10. No, more like 11. Yeah, left at about 11 to get up there, and I rode with two very close friends of mine who are on the staff, Amanda and Ben. Or sorry, Amanda and Andrew. Andrew's son is named Ben, so I got it mixed up. Amanda and Andrew and I all took my car, and we went up, and of course it took 4.5 hours instead of 3 to get up there because traffic was of just course awful, especially once we got up to the Clemson area on 85. And then if I don't know if you've ever driven on 85 North in South Carolina, but there is like about 30 minutes of sort of car style what I would describe as like bobsledding, where you're just in this little narrow concrete trough that is one lane wide for about 30 to 45 minutes. So that of course was delightful. Yeah, it's apparently like South Carolina has one of the lowest gas taxes in the nation, so they're just constantly working on the maintenance and repair of their interstate. So that was, suboptimal. But we got up there and we had about an hour to sort of walk around downtown Charlotte before the Redcoats got there. So, we just did some people watching, walked around. We were trying to find a place to eat, and a lot of the places in downtown Charlotte were closed for whatever reason. We walked into a taco joint, and literally as we walked in, there was, the sort of like stereotypical one sorority girl sort of supporting another sorority girl as she's going through it or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And so this is it, like I would say about 3, and as we walked in, one of them just threw up all over herself, and we were like, okay. COVID's not great right now, but just like throw up in the air on top of that. So we turned around, Redcoats showed up. It was, we'll say hectic, lots of real tight deadlines. So we got into the stadium, Charlotte Stadium, Bank of America Stadium is gorgeous.
Oh, yeah?
It's like one big bowl. It's sort of, Jaguar Stadium-esque, I would say. But the advantage it has is A, the weather's better, or it was that day, or it was on Saturday, and B, that it's the end zone that we're in, the view was amazing because like right over the far rim of the stadium, you could see like the Charlotte skyline. And for whatever reason, they put the away band in, because we were the away team, they put the away band in the end zone that was shaded from the get-go. So we didn't have to deal with sun, and that was great. Redcoats did a really good job, had a really good run, needed to have a really good run because, everybody is dealing in the band world, just as in the football world, with a lot of turnover, and there just are a lot of Redcoats who'd never marched before. So I thought they did a really good job dealing with that. I thought that, experientially, it was really fun to be at the game. I don't know how fun of a game it was to watch. Watching the kind of defense that Georgia played in person is really pretty spectacular. Like there's the physicality and like the pad popping. I fear that maybe it wasn't the world's most engaging game to watch, like as a TV fan. But we had a great time. We got done. Obviously we got to win, and we can talk about sort of the game, our reactions to the game in a moment. But when we got done, we went back, we ate for a second so we could let the traffic die down. We left about 12. We got home at about 4:30. And it was one of those things where I was so tired that I was physically in pain by the time I got home, and I slept for like 10 hours. But a weird thing that happened is that we were on the way home, and we came to a Quick Trip on the outskirts of Charlotte. And I was like, a Quick Trip, let's fill up. I need to go get like a Mountain Dew or whatever. And so we went in, and a lot of times when we say like shady, what we mean is like poor people live around here. And this Quick Trip was not that shady. Like it was really nice inside, and it was not in like a bad area so far as we could tell. But it was midnight, and so I walked in, and I was like, the vibe is weird in this Quick Trip tonight. Like I did not find Jesus in that Quick Trip.
Decidedly not vibing.
Yeah. So I got a drink, and I went up to the counter, and it was one of those counters that had 2 cash registers, and it was like the Quick Trip thing where one guy goes back and forth between the cash registers. There's 2 lines, and in the middle of the 2 lines, there's a dude that I thought was like a cop, right? And I'm like, oh, it's just like off-duty cops hang out at Quick Trips. That's like a thing, right? Especially late night, because there's robberies and stuff. And then I realized, no, it's not a cop. It is like Quick Trip corporate security, which is super cyberpunk, first of all. But second, this was not just like a dude with a nightstick. Like he had a gun, and he had his hand on the gun the whole time I was there. And like it was like a loop holster that had like a retaining loop over the top, over the butt of the action of the gun. And like every time someone walked by, he would flip the retaining loop off. And so I was just like, what happened in this Quick Trip, y'all?
Where was this at?
This was out in Charlotte.
Okay.
And it was not in like the worst neighborhood I've ever been in. It was not like when I went, we got gas, and I wasn't like, oh wow, this is shady. I mean, there were some like people out there listening to music or whatever, but it wasn't like like dudes with AKs or whatever, and
Yeah.
I just went in and I was like, this is very menacing. The energy is very bad in here. So I bought my Gatorade and my Mountain Dew and my trail mix and like got the hell out of there. So other than that, other than the late night return time and the sort of slightly menacing quick trip, it was pretty much a perfect day. I mean, just the experience of I don't know, just the experience of like having a big game, the situation before the game, just like the context of the game and where we all were and where the team was.
Mm-hmm.
It just really felt like a game that Georgia was going to lose.
Yeah.
It's the kind of game that Georgia has lost a lot. And a lot of times when I've been in band, Georgia has lost this kind of game at a neutral site. And so I don't know. It's just I was telling my wife, it was like, I don't know what to do with my hands. Like I'm totally befuddled about how to handle this experience of like winning a close, important non-conference game.
So this is kind of neat. We have a lot of questions, first off, and so I think a lot of this episode can kind of be guided by those questions. So we may go back and forth through Ask CBCs. Before we get into that, I just wanted to mention we'll put this in the show notes as well. I just dropped it into our Discord, and once again, if you're not on the Discord, it only costs $1, and you could be listening to this live and be getting all of the bonus content as far as our show notes goes, and all of access to our links in live time. But the first thing that Nathan found and has brought to our advanced stats pedestal, our shrine, if I may, today, is the gameonpaper.com stats, and it is doing all the work that we have done for the last 5 years, but for us, and it's beautiful. it's gorgeous. The actual user interface is gorgeous. It sets up all of the team stats. It's like at a very advanced box score.
Yeah.
And it shows a few really exciting stats that I'm excited to talk about. One, for instance, is the game excitement index, which is a very simple formula that's kind of based on and around the win probability at any point in the game. And so it's like how much the points are swinging one way or another throughout the game. And just a spoiler alert, the game excitement index for this game is very low, meaning that Georgia, as per the stats, handled this game from start to finish. It is actually a 5.58 on the game excitement index ranking here, which I think is really, really great. But do you want to kind of walk us through some of these stats? What is it that we see that's interesting? Anything that kind of tells a story objectively for us?
So first of all, I do want to say that this is a website that's put together by just a guy over at and I found it through the Split Zone Duo Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
You should follow our Patreon, but if you don't, if you want another good college football Patreon, Split Zone Duo is doing a very good job. But yeah, so the one thing obviously is if we looked at expected points, total EPA, it's pretty bad for both teams. I think UGA ended with like negative 12.72 expected points, but Clemson ended with negative 23 expected points. Ugh. At some point they were like in the negative 25s. So just to briefly explain, yeah,
the rest is just gonna start taking points away.
No, it's really bad. So EPA, which is either expected points or sometimes it's PPA, but EPA is basically just like estimated or expected point added. So basically it's just like how many points was each play worth. So if you have a 1st and 10 on the 50 and the average points you score from that position is 3, and then you have a 1st and 10 on the 40 and the average points you score from that position is 3.4, well then the play in between those two where you gain 10 yards, that gained you 0.4 expected points. For most individual players or plays, 0.2 expected points is really good. So if your EPA as a quarterback is 0.2, it's not really good, but that's like just above average or whatever. So it means every time you throw the ball, you basically add 0.2 points to the final score. So, a really good defensive, a really good defense will average negative expected points added, right? Which means like every time you snap the ball against this defense, you are basically taking points away from your expected points added, basically. So if we look at the EPA, the overall EPA, so Georgia's overall EPA was negative 12.68, which means the things that they did.
The things they did.
Yeah, the things that they did when they were doing, when they had the ball, cost them negative 12 points. So you've got a couple of really big negative plays in there. You've got an interception, right? But it didn't matter because Clemson's overall offensive EPA was negative 32.77. They got positive 5 EPA from special teams from that turnover, and they got 4 points from that from penalty EPA. So if we were just taking when the Tigers snapped the ball with possession, every time they snapped the ball, like they were costing themselves points functionally. So UGA had 14 havoc plays. 23% of the times that they snapped the ball, Clemson either had a sack, a tackle for loss, an interception, or a pass breakup, or a batted pass. 8 tackles for loss generated from Georgia, 7 passing, 1 rushing. So that counts snaps. And if we look at raw yards, which is not great because the way we calculate yards in college football, we use sack yards as rushing yards. But even just like raw yards are pretty rough in this game, right? If we do net yards where we count sacks, Clemson had 2 yards rushing. I mean, it was obviously the defensive slugfest that it was shown to be, but I don't think this game was obviously close, and obviously one play could have changed this game radically, like a busted coverage or assignment. But from a statistical standpoint, negative 20 or negative 32 EPA offensive EPA over 70 plays or 72 plays is absolutely stupefyingly bad. Like, so hold on, just to briefly hold on. This is great audio, but I want to make sure that I get this across. So they had 72 plays, right? And they had a negative 32 EPA, which means that basically every time Clemson snapped the ball, they were taking like 0.2 points away, basically. So it's like every time Clemson walked up, like there were times during this game where Clemson would have been better off. Oh, yeah, almost half a point every time, 0.4 points every time they snapped the ball. They lost, right? There were several plays during which Clemson would have been better off to snap the ball and take a knee than what they did, right? That's absolutely insane. Like, for instance, that play, the play where Clemson threw the through the pick 6 was like a negative 11 EPA play. Like, they cost themselves 11 points on that play. So if the obvious top line statistical thing that we can find in this game is that Georgia's defense was not just fluky good. Georgia's defense was not just they got a couple of big sacks but otherwise gave up some soft yards or whatever. Georgia's defense was as good as you think they are. This was a complete defensive ass whipping. And like, when we were there, it was very clear, especially in the third and fourth quarter, that Clemson's offense did not want to go on the field. They could not block Georgia. And on some level, if you can't block, you're not going to win.
No.
And now things were perfect for Georgia, but defensively, it's as good as it seems like it is. So for instance, like middle 8 plays. So in the middle 8 is this idea that, like, basically if you take the middle 8 minutes of the game, which is the 4 minutes before halftime and the 4 minutes after halftime, a lot of times those are the most important time in the game, basically. So Georgia only ran 4 middle 8 plays on offense. Clemson ran 18. But in those 18 middle 8 plays, Clemson's EPA was negative 14.25. In the middle 8 minutes of the game, which are the most important swinging minutes of the game because you can do back-to-back possessions after halftime, every time Clemson snapped the ball, they lost 0.79 points.
Jeez. Yeah, I was wondering about that a little bit because I like that it lays out the middle 8 plays in this, and I'm glad that you got there pretty immediately because there is a big disparity there between the two teams. But the disparity, thankfully, was in our favor, and that Clemson just technically lost points every time they snapped the ball.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, like, I think that, if you were a Clemson fan, you would say, well, if we scored a touchdown, X, Y, and Z, it would be a 1-possession game or it would be tied or whatever. And that's definitely true. But I think that sort of ignores the fact that, like, okay, so obviously both of these teams had pretty bad offensive nights, right? Not a lot of continuity. You had injuries on Georgia's side. On Clemson's side, you were breaking a lot of people. Clemson just doesn't have an offensive line that can block a defensive line of the caliber of Georgia. But I think that in a game where both teams were a little bit more advanced offensively, you would have just seen a similar result with more points. Like, this game, but I mean, like I tweeted, make their ass quit at the end of the game in the fourth quarter, main because I was pretty jacked up. But the reason I tweeted that is that on that last offensive possession, Georgia got into a single back under center set and ran the same play like 6
Yeah.
times. They ran James Cook in motion, and then they ran an inside zone, and they did the same thing, and Clemson could not stop it. And I think, we can answer some questions about how the flow of the game went, but I think that don't get it twisted. You had 3, maybe 4 starters out, right? You had Tate Ratledge out. You had Darnell Washington out, who would definitely have started. You had Tyke Washington out, right? You had a defensive starter out. You lost an offensive lineman. Justin Schaefer got injured. Warren Erickson, who was already hurt, had to play left guard because Tate Ratledge is out now for the season. And you put an absolute ass whipping on the 3rd-ranked team in the nation, right? And that's what the game was. And don't let anyone who is an Ohio State or Alabama or whatever fan tell you anything different. There are not many teams in this country other than Alabama. There are probably no teams in the country that want this smoke right now. Like, because if Georgia just has an average offensive game against anybody with that defensive performance, they're going to beat anybody in the nation. And I include Alabama in that.
Oh, absolutely. This is not by far on our schedule, on our regular season schedule. Obviously, this is the best defense we'll face all season. There's a chance that it might be still the best defense we'll face all season. We haven't seen, Alabama had a fantastic game and held a pretty okay Miami team to 2 touchdowns, I think, 14 on the day. But it's a fairly similar situation. They had all their best players return. They were, locked and loaded. And we said before in our preview episode that this game is going to be decided when Georgia has the ball on offense. And that was not true.
Very wrong.
Very wrong.
As everyone else, I would point out.
But, it is what it is. And I'm glad that, our defense played exactly how they are supposed to, and we expected them to play. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself in a way, but I definitely want to talk, now that we're just kind of looking at all these stats, about the one question on everybody's mind going forward is there anything in these stats that can help us kind of assuage our concerns about the Georgia offense? Like, I believe, and I think I know still, just by watching the play calling and sort of schematically watching the game on Saturday, that we really didn't pull a whole lot of big plays, and that was because we didn't have to. But is there anything that's indicative of kind of our future offensive dealings in these stats?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to say it that Georgia was bad on offense, right? And so, I mean, I guess a couple of things that you can take away. Zamir White, 5.69 yards per play, 0.21 EPA per play, which is good. I mean, it's not like crazy, but it's good. 54% X rate, or 54% success rate. -4 win percentage added, but that ultimately that doesn't really matter. I think obviously you got to take the biggest positive takeaway is that the run game seems to be working, and I think that Georgia's offensive line throughout the game, despite having to shuffle, had some really good moments in the run game. Really creased Clemson a lot in those last 2 quarters. JT Daniels 22 for 30, 135 yards, no touchdowns, one interception, 1 sack, 4.35 yards per play, that's really the number to me. -0.38 EPA per play, which is bad, but not as bad as DJ Uiagalelei. Well, no, it's actually slightly worse on an EPA basis than DJ's Uiagalelei was. 29% success rate and -11 EPA on the day. Of course, DJ had -14 on the day because he had more snaps. But I mean, if we're kind of just going to observations, the sort of observation segment of the show, welcome to the segment. I guess the 2 observations I had were, I think that schematically, Georgia did some interesting things in terms of formational stuff. I think a lot of the stuff that we said that Georgia would do in our preview episode happened. I just think it wasn't successful, right? Yeah. Georgia tried to work the middle of the field. Georgia tried to do some underneath stuff. And on the one hand, you have to credit Clemson because, despite, I think that the defensive line of Clemson had some really good moments, but ended up kind of getting gassed because they weren't as deep. But I think that the Clemson secondary really was running downhill. Really ate that underneath stuff up. So, my observation / takeaway / whatever on Georgia's offense is kind of kind of multifaceted because on the one hand, I do think that you had. I don't think that Kirby or Munkin would tell you, "Oh, like we were intentionally this conservative." I don't think they were. I don't think there was really anything in the bank. I don't think that there's like a secret playbook for UAB. I do think that they had the terms of the game offensively dictated to them by how good Clemson was, which is never a place you want to start with, but I think it just was. And I think furthermore that, you know, I think after the second quarter, Kirby figured out like these guys can't really do anything against us offensively. Now, I don't think they went into a shell. I think that they were still trying to score points. I think Kirby would have really loved to win that game like 17-3. And I think he would have been one offensive touchdown. He would have been way happier. But I also think that, you know, there's a difference between saying, oh, we had things left in the playbook, which I don't think is true, or we weren't trying to score, which I don't think is true, and saying we were being conservative, right? Like 4.35 yards per play from a 2021 quarterback. What that tells me is we didn't think that with Tate Ratledge out that we could block Ryan Brzee, basically. We didn't think we could block Miles Murphy on the deep stuff. Now, I thought that there was some, obviously there's one really bad decision from JT, but I thought, you know, he looked a little hesitant at times. I think this game is probably much different if either of these teams has a game before it, you know, against probably a lesser opponent, because I think in that instance, you have a lot more confidence coming in just with the speed of the game and just like, you know, you've knocked the rust off. So, I mean, do you have any other observations or just things you saw before we get into like our takeaways for stuff going forward?
Still looking at the stats here. I will say it is and it isn't disappointing that we had 0% of our plays were explosive plays.
Yeah.
Not a single one.
Yeah, there's no way to make the data look better. It's pretty bad.
That does suck, definitely. But at the same time, I still think this is a top 15 offense at the end of the day. And I think that a top 15 offense, if I remember correctly, our offense going into the national championship was by FPI and SP Plus was like a 12th ranked offense, and our defense was the first ranked defense. And so if we're using that same formula, just with a different schematics system, it may yield the same results. I'm not upset about that, is how I feel about it. It feels like we have a lot of the same pieces in, you know, this linebacking core and this defensive line. And so, yeah.
I mean, I think you're right. I think Bill Connolly said today that he thought that Clemson could be a top 5 offense still and that Georgia could be a top 15 offense. And I think that's true. I think obviously one of the takeaways is, you know, if we're going to go into our sort of like takeaway segment of what we take forward from this, one is like Georgia's got to get healthy.
Yeah.
We have a question about this later on, but I guess we can kind of we can address it now. Somebody asked us about Jermaine Burton, like why was he out here? Well, I think Jermaine Burton was out there because he was one of the healthier wide receivers on the team. But we found out today in the press conference for the UAB game that basically he had 10 to 15 of the 45 practices as a healthy player. He was not 100%, right? There were 2 or 3 times where he just got blown up in a wide receiver blocking thing where we threw like a little underneath screen to either another wide receiver, to James Cook, you know, on a flat route, and he just got absolutely lit up for a negative play. And so, you know, if this team is all the way healthy with or without Gilbert, I think that it's probably at least a top 20, top 25 offense. And I think, you know, if you can get Kyrus Jackson returned punts, but, you know, apparently wasn't good enough, didn't have the confidence in the knee. So if you get Blaylock and Jackson back, I think you're going to start to feel better. If you get a healthier version of, you know, Jermaine Burton, I think you start to feel better. So I think one of the big takeaways is like these next 3 weeks, I think you're going to see a lot of running from UGA.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we're going to try to work some guys back in, but ultimately you're going to see a lot of just like inside zone, split zone, outside zone, handed off to Kendall Milton / Zamir White / Kenny McIntosh, because Georgia just has to get some healthy pass catchers. I think to me, that's the biggest takeaway.
Yeah.
I mean, my other big takeaway is I don't know that we really saw anything out of JT that would make us think that he's taken a step forward. Now, I don't think that JT Daniels hasn't taken a step forward. I don't think that he can't. I just don't think we really saw enough to really definitively say either way. He looked, you know, hesitant at time, which makes sense because he probably played the best defensive line he's going to play until he gets to Atlanta. But he has to learn to trust his offensive line to drive the ball, to not bail out quite as quick. And, you know, Georgia has to start, I think, and some of this might have been just Munkin thinking, well, we just have to run it. But I think Georgia has to make a more concerted effort to give JT some glance routes for when things break down in the offensive line. So
Yeah.
that's, to me, those are my big takeaways. Do you have anything else?
I will say, from just a TV viewing standpoint, JT looked good still. Like, he looked calm, he looked collected. I don't recall a whole lot of plays where he looked frazzled. There were, there's the one sack that Clemson did get, and there were a few passes deflected. But even after those and following that play, he didn't seem like totally ruined or totally frazzled after that. He still kept doing what he was doing. At the end of the day, he did the job that he needed to do. And I think it's the first game of the season. We have a long season. Let's not have any more injuries. Let's not put balls in places where you could get a guy hurt, essentially. I think that it might come down to that. And the question that was asked about that was about Jermaine Burton specifically was from Cape, asking, was anyone else surprised Jermaine Burton was a non-factor in our passing game? As much attention as he got the latter half of the last year, I was shocked there wasn't a play or two designed to get the ball in his hands. And we just lost you. Where did you go?
I don't know. My camera went out. There it is. I'm back.
Okay. Yeah, and so just that question, though, I found it. I didn't find it weird that he wasn't a factor. I found it weird that it felt like we were using plays that we saw him be successful in this year. That we saw him be successful in last year. We saw them this year, but without him as the key piece of those plays. Like all of those, like right over the top plays and those sweeps and things like that. We did see some pieces like that were mainly tight ends, which is it's meant to be a tight end play at the end of the day most of the time. So I wasn't too surprised about that, but I was surprised that he wasn't more of a factor in those plays in the rotation, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does make sense. I think you having him out there because he's one of your only options is one thing, and that's fine. But my biggest thing was, I think we could have implemented him better. I think we could have sort of designed some things for him better. But it's also just at some point, if he is not ready, don't make him block.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing. And I think we figured that out because we stopped throwing that to his side. But I mean, ultimately, the answer is that we just have to get healthier.
Yeah.
And it seems like Tyke Smith and Darnell Washington should at least be back by, if not, UAP or South Carolina, then maybe after the Vanderbilt game. So I mean, that gives us, I think, the ceiling on this offense, like we said, is still pretty high. But I have learned enough in my time of doing this thing that you have to believe it when you see it, basically, right? So right now, all I know about this team is that they probably have the best defense in the country. And they have pretty good special teams when they can get out of their own way. We saw a miss from Hot Pod, but that would have really sealed the game. If we'd have been up 13-3, I think the game would have been a little bit different. But aside from one Hot Pod miss and an errant bounce that I still think hit James Skalski before it hit whoever it did hit, I forget who actually was who got the brunt of that. Aside from those things, I think special teams look pretty good. And you can ride that a long way. I don't think you can ride number one defense, good special teams to the national championship the way that you used to be able to. But I think, you can muddle around until you get on your stride offensively because of the way the schedule breaks down, right? I mean, you the next 3 weeks having UAB, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and, South Carolina had, I guess, a good game against a bad opponent, but Vanderbilt might be the worst team in the country. And that's saying something. That's really saying something because New Mexico State and Connecticut are also god awful. So the fact that Vanderbilt might be worse than them is just staggering. They lost to East Tennessee.
Georgia Tech lost to a team that didn't win a game last year, so there's that.
Yeah.
But,
So I mean, you have some really bad teams on the schedule, and you have some teams that you should be able to beat with your third string, and that's not even that's not hubris or arrogance or whatever. UGA's scout team has a shot against Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Now they probably wouldn't win, but they have a shot, right? You know what I'm saying? So you have to take advantage of this time that you have in the lull in the schedule when you kind of get to do the Clemson thing, right? We don't get to do the Clemson thing the entire year, but if you look at the schedule coming up, I mean, you should be an easy 4 or 5-0. And I mean, you should win every game, but I mean, over the next month, you have UAB, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and then Auburn. So you have 4 weeks to Auburn. And, that's going to be, you have that back to back of going to Auburn and having Kentucky coming to Georgia. And that's sort of outside of the Florida game, that's kind of your schedule, right? Those 3 games, Kentucky, Auburn, Florida. And so if you can get healthy, that's my takeaway. Like if you are healthy by the time Auburn happens, you should go to the SEC championship and maybe the college football playoff, right? You just hope that Ron Corson makes a full recovery from COVID, which it seems like he is, and that therapy goes well or whatever.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question from John Luke Godogs in the Ask CBC, actually, that while we're talking about all this, we're talking about the passing game and everything. He asks, what's the reason for the lack of vertical passing game? I noticed that even the healthy receivers weren't running any deep routes, and I can't figure out if it was because of the injury situation or if it was a Monken strategy decision based on Clemson's personnel.
Well, I think it was a personnel decision. I wish we'd been a little bit more aggressive, but there were several times where we were in obvious passing downs and the pocket just sort of collapsed around JT, and it was pretty clear that he was not. He looked comfortable and he looked like he knew what he was doing most of the time, but he was running for his life at times back there. Not as bad as DJ had it, but still, I think we just sort of decided that we could win a closer game. We felt like it's more likely that we win this game if we are conservative, which normally that is not the correct answer in football, but I think that there's a slight exception on this time because I think their thought was, well, if JT has a turnover and we throw a pick 6, then who knows who's going to win. But if we just keep punting well and, running the clock down, that, we can sort of get out of here like that. Now, I don't really think that that's a super good answer, but I think that there was an intentional decision to protect JT because, I think part of the problem that Clemson had, if you look at it from the opposite angle, part of the problem that Clemson had is that they didn't really do a lot. I mean, they had like 12 personnel, or the closest thing they have to 12 personnel, and max protect a lot, but they didn't do a lot in terms of their actual playbook to protect DJ. Right? They couldn't run. I mean, one of the stats that we haven't talked about is that Clemson running the ball they ran 16% of the time, so 27% of the time they ran, and they had negative 7.8 EPA on run plays, negative 0.49 on run plays, which meant every time they ran the ball they lost half a point. So I think they decided pretty early that they couldn't run, and that is what led to those 7 sacks, right? And I think I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand the logic from Monken and Smart, which is these guys are playing right into our hands. We are going to keep sacking this dude. We are going to give up a minimum amount of points. And so I think in their mind, the best version of this game, you don't win 10-3, but you might win like 17-3.
Yeah.
If you imagine like if that hot pod kick goes in, which it should have probably, if you imagine like, what if Ladd McConkey, who I thought was going to have a big game but didn't, what if Ladd McConkey catches that obvious touchdown? Penalties called the correct way, which I think the reffing was pretty bad this weekend, right? So I think there's a version in this game where we're kind of wary about what the offense is doing, but we still end up with like 17 to 24 points, right? So I think that was a deliberate choice, and I guess it's up for you to decide whether or not that was a correct answer.
Yeah. I think that's the last like pure stats question we have in the asks. There's other questions that are kind of more they're more qualitative than quantitative.
Do you want to go over our predictions and over-unders?
Oh yeah, and how wrong they were.
We were very well. We got a couple right. So for me, we had over under 2.5 touchdowns from UJRBs.
We both say under. That's good.
Yeah, we both said under. We both got that right.
Okay.
I said over under.
It is a lot of sacks, but 7 is also
7 is even more. So over under 3 sacks for Clemson. You said under, and you were correct, and I said over, and I was wrong. I thought that Miles Murphy would have a bigger day, but I guess
not
that's
today.
part of.
Being Cthulhu will accept theories of deals with lesser gods as well. Oh man,
I like the idea. Okay, here's what I like about this is Nick Saban not as the devil, but Nick Saban as a D&D style warlock.
Yes,
like Nick Saban has a pact with a Fey Queen. Who one day he will pay that by being her plaything for the rest of eternity. But for now, she's making him a very good, sort of in the World of Darkness changeling mythos, we would say that he is like a foundling, right?
Yes.
And that some Fae wants him back because they see something beautiful in him or whatever. And I really like that idea.
That is really nice. I will preface this too with the fact that like I do have a lot of respect for Nick Saban, and I think he's actually really good guy otherwise than just being a good football coach. And there's a really lovely GQ article that was written about him several years ago. But he also really hates being called and compared to Satan. But I'm just gonna say his middle name's Lucifer, and his birthday is Halloween. That man may just be the Christian devil. And if I had more time to kind of go through more of the actual stats, his wins or win percentages, I'm sure I would find something in there, that's kind of evil, something there that's kind of
I don't think he's evil. I think he's boring.
he is pretty
You know what I
boring.
mean? It's like he's like the Darth Vader of coaches. He's like the bad guy. It's just sort of like whatever. Show a chink in the armor, man. Even the Death Star had like an exhaust port you could shoot. You know?
Yep. Yeah. So Jay Anderson, 25. Should I feel better or worse about UGA's championship odds after this game? I assume likelihood of making the playoff goes up after knocking off a competitor, but LSU in 2019 and Bama in 2018 makes me wonder about a defense-first UGA team winning the 2 playoff games, or 3 if we count the SEC championship game.
And I think you should feel better because I think defense doesn't win championships anymore, but you have to, or at least I feel like that the ceiling on this offense is way higher. So if you have an offense that's top 15 instead of top 5 with this defense, I think you can win.
Next question, Chris D in London, which is probably one of my favorite new Discord friends. Just got to put that out there. Also has a really lovely story about being a Georgia football fan. And
these big Power 5, the Power 5, Group of 5, or Power 5 FCS games happen. So one of them is, obviously regional footprint. It is just easier to bring someone in from the Southeast. You don't have to pay them as much money if they can bus, right? Or if they can take a short plane ride. Number 2 would be that, for recruiting purposes, I don't think the recruiting thing is we want exposure in Alabama. I think Georgia's recruiting apparatus is such that they know they can recruit anywhere in the nation and in the world if they want. So they're not really that worried about, finding at like people in Alabama recognizing the Georgia G because they played UAB.
Yeah.
I think the reason they care about that is that, despite what every coach in the world will tell you, these games are a little bit less stressful for them than a game against Auburn or South Carolina or whatever. So if you want to have a big recruiting day, especially with the lower classes, where like with your sophomores and juniors that you're recruiting early, you can really put some one-on-one time in with recruits and not worry so much about like, I have to spend every second game planning. So that's the recruiting draw is you have to have some games that aren't high leverage so you can actually recruit in season. The other draw is more relational. So a lot of the reason that FCS, FBS games happen, but sometimes with Group of 5 games as well, is all of these people, there's a finite number of people with the ability to coach football at this level or with the ability to administrate at this level. So, I think that Kirby and Josh Brooks would tell you that the next time they hire a coach or an associate athletic director, it very well could be someone at UAB. And a lot of these guys used to work together, right? So Kirby, I know, is friends with Bill Clark. I don't think they were ever actually, he's the coach at UAB. I don't think they were ever actually on the same staff, but I knew they're friends. They all like have like lake houses near each other or whatever. So that does matter. But then also like the like sort of collegiality of the relationship between these two universities matters. It seems like it doesn't, but it does. It pays to have these guys, to have like friends at the lower end of the sport, because that is your recruiting op-ed for coaches and administrators. And then the final thing is just like UAB is going to probably be, if you have to have a low interest game against against sort of like not a body bag team, but a team you're probably going to beat, UAB probably has more interest for most Georgia fans than, Louisiana, which is not a body bag game at all because they're pretty good, but then Louisiana Tech or Middle Tennessee. UAB has a sort of geographical footprint similar in nature to UGA's, and also they have a pretty good brand right now because of the whole like comeback from the dead thing.
I like that. And the very last question from Christy: which book would you most recommend about the history of the Georgia football program? And I have a few of these. What do you have?
Seth Emerson's book.
Yep.
Seth Emerson wrote
Attack
a book
Today.
that's very good called Attack Today. There's one about Mark Richt that's really good. I actually really like. It's not about the whole program, but if you want to see like some of the just like 1980 stuff, Bill Connolly has a book called The 50 Most interesting, or the 50 best, and then it slashed out most interesting college football teams of all time, wherein he basically talks about like just really important teams in the history of college football, and he has like a whole chapter about the 1980 UGA team, and just like how they actually were not that good statistically, and how, not that they got lucky to win. I mean, they did get lucky a couple of times, but also just that like it was sort of, they were like a team of destiny. So that's a really interesting one. Do you have any others?
Yeah. There's a few. There's Beluto Scott. That's the greatest moments in Georgia football history, and it's a really well researched book. It's written by the former public relations director for the Georgia Sports Hall of Fame. So he actually interviews a lot of people that were at the Georgia Florida game in 1980, and a lot of people regard that play, like that last play in the last few seconds of that game, the touchdown there that was like a full the full field touchdown, as one of the most important and most significant plays in Georgia football history. But that's a really cool book, just because I'm sort of a history nerd, and I really enjoy the interviews in that one. Also, the From Herschel to a Hobnail Boot, that's all about Larry Munson. And I think that you can't talk about Georgia football history without talking about Larry Munson. And then the very last one is Damn Good Dogs, and it is the story of Uga and all of our Bulldog mascots. It's very, very fun. And I just really like dogs. So, yeah, that's a really good one. Next question, Ryan Clark. If I'm going to start the Star Wars Extended Universe reading and or shows, where should I start, Nathan?
Okay, so
He about to flex.
Extended Universe is technically just the books at this point, because back up. The technical name for it now is the Legends canon, which is basically they went in before the release of, I'm going to shift and it's going to make a lot of noise and I apologize. All right, there we go. They went in before the release of The Force Awakens, and they basically decanonized all of the books. And they have brought back some of them in with, writing the Thrawn stuff, and they brought some of it back, but mostly it's decanonized. So that's called the Legends canon. If you want to start with those books, I think sort of the high watermarks, Rogue Squadron is the Rogue Squadron and Wraith Squadron series. That's 10 books total. They're really high watermarks. Michael A. Stackpole is actually a really good author. The Courtship of Princess Leia is the chronological first book that it takes place right after Return of the Jedi. It's like the next thing the gang does. It's very interesting.
Getting the gang back together.
Yeah, it is really that. The New Jedi Order books are just sort of Luke goes to Yavin, and instead of becoming a hermit, he sort of starts a New Jedi Order, and that's a really nice crossover book because you get stuff from the Rogue Squadron and Wraith Squadron. You get stuff from the sort of Courtship of Princess Leia arc, founding the New Republic arc. That's where I would start. In terms of shows, I mean, the Clone Wars show is excellent. Rebels is very good.
Don't sleep on the Clone Wars show.
I think Ryan's probably watched all these, but the extended, there weren't any extended universe shows, unfortunately. But the books is really what the Legends canon is about.
I would also say play Shadows of the Empire from N64.
Shadows of the Empire, and also the book Shadows of the Empire is I think. I'm pretty sure Shadows is still canon, although I couldn't promise you.
I don't know if it.
They might have been added to Legends canon. Shadows of the Empire takes place between, I think, the episode 4 and episode 5, and it's about sort of like a Han Solo copy, Dash Rendar. It's really good. And then I guess for books, also for games, there are some really good Star Wars Legend games. So Knights of the Old Republic and Knights of the Old Republic 2 are probably the high watermark.
Two of the best games ever made.
Yeah, they really are. Then there's a game where you play as sort of like a gray Jedi that I really like. The name is escaping me. It's like no. You play it is an old game. I'll tell you just a second. Fallen Order is good. But that's not what I'm talking about. The problem is there's like 100 Star Wars video games.
I'm gonna click this one.
Yeah, this is really good audio. So the Star Wars Jedi Knight Academy series is are 3 or 4 very, very good games. The Rogue Leader X-Wing games and then the TIE Fighter game are very good. But I was gonna say the Star Wars The Force Unleashed series is really interesting. It's kind of like you're kind of Sith you're kind of a bad guy. You're at least a bad boy Jedi. You know what I mean? And it's very interesting. The Force Unleashed series really influenced the Fallen Order series. Anyway, we got to move on.
uh, let's see. Jay Ashley, best game day activities for someone going to their first game is a non-red code.
I don't know.
Nathan's only done it a few times. I just really like walking through. Like, don't stay in two places too long. I would say just keep walking through campus, keep seeing what you see. I really love game days with a later kickoff time because you get to kind of meander your way through campus and see you just kind of see who you see, and you might know you'll be surprised by how many more people you know that are just there tailgating. Yeah, I'm always surprised by how many people I just run into that I know, and I think it's a really neat way to experience it, and everybody's friendly and ready to hang out, and like people just invite you in, and it's one of the camaraderie is really special, and I think that we can all relate to that. Is that the reason why we're a part of all this thing is because we enjoy the camaraderie, and it's on full display on game days, just walking through campus, and so I would definitely go and do that.
Yeah, I would say also breweries are fun.
Breweries are
That's
very
one
fun.
thing I've done.
Yeah, All Good is the game day spot, and if you want to go hang out, yeah. Cap Falcon asks, what do you think is the best drink after a long day of outside work and after a long day of frustrating meetings at the office?
Outside work, I'm definitely like a lager guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think like a classic city lager or like a Kolsch or just something cold. A lot of times like a Bohemian style Mexican beer. Pacifico is my favorite cheap Mexican beer. I love Pacifico. In the shower, it's I think like the high watermark shower beer. What do you think for outside work?
Outside work, I like something more tart. I like an Athena, something like that. A Berliner Weiss. Depends on what time of the year too. Like if it's in the fall, I want to have like an Allagash White. It's nice and fall-y.
Or an Oktoberfest.
Or an Oktoberfest, yeah. And after a long day of frustrating meetings, bourbon. Just bourbon.
I try to avoid frustration drinking because for me personally it doesn't end well, but I like to make a cocktail when I'm really had a stressful day and I want to drink. I want to make something that like has a process to the making of it. Even if I have a beer, I want to have a good beer that I pour and like try to get the pour right and smell it and do the whole process. But like I really like to make a cocktail because I find like the act of making it can kind of de-stress sometimes. So like I'll make an old fashioned from scratch and really zone in on like the experience of making it, or I'll make, like some kind of aperitif drink, or I'll make a mint julep or something. But just the process is good.
Next question from Abby: favorite cosplay to do, or favorite cosplay you have seen?
I mean,
I
that's a big question, dude.
We always have fallback Star Wars costumes, but my favorite costumes I've seen still, I think, is I think this is important because of Dragon Con. Dragon Con was this past weekend. R.I.P. I did not go, but I saw a bunch of guys dressed up as the soldiers from Mulan when they all dress up. And they go undercover as, I don't know the actual name of, they're not
Cortesians.
Thank you, Cortesians. Yeah. That I was gonna say Grisha, which is because I've been reading Shadow and Bone, but I know that geisha was the word, but I couldn't think. I know that's not proper either. I think I don't actually know. But yeah, I know you have a Han Solo fallback as well.
Yeah, I have a Han Solo fallback. I have not done a lot of cosplaying just because I have to go to a game this weekend every year for Dragon Con when I would normally do cosplaying. I think one of my favorite ones that I've ever seen, I saw John Lewis cosplaying as himself at the Selma Bridge seriously, like, that's John incredible. Lewis went to Dragon Con and he was wearing the outfit he had on at the Selma Bridge, like the long gray trench coat and the backpack, but then he had a whole pack of little kids following him, also dressed like him.
That's so cool.
Which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. Next question. Cowboy McPoyle I think this is the first question for this person. How concerned, if at all, are we about offensive production? Was Saturday just a reflection of injuries, playing a really strong defense, or a lack of an offensive identity? And I know this is the second time we've asked this already, but this is the first time they've asked offensive identity. So
I think it is. I think it's sort of it's a combination of the first two, right? Really, it's injuries and defense. I think there is an offensive identity. I just don't think we've seen it yet. And I think that until you get back, especially Darnell and a healthy Kyrus and a healthy Jermaine Burton, you're not going to be able to see it.
Yeah. The 984. Who would win, UGA or the Pac-12 North All-Stars?
So yeah, I've been doing some. I've been doing a little bit of just sort of poking around on this question. So the Pac-12 North. Okay, so you have a couple of teams that mean that you would probably have. It would probably be the All-Stars. Because you have a couple of teams in the North Division that have some really good players. So you have Oregon, California, Oregon State, Stanford, Washington State. So the biggest thing is you get Kayvon Thibodeau with that, from Oregon, who is a game-wrecking pass breaker. He might be the best player in the nation. So that alone makes me think probably the Pac-12 North. You have just like a very deep team. So if you're doing the All-Stars and we're assuming that you're only going to get like 85 players of like the 85 players in the Pac-12 North, I think it's probably the All-Star team, but I think it would be closer than. My instinct is just to be like, oh no, obviously it's the All-Star team. It's not close because you get to pick the best players. But I think with UJ's defense, it would actually be closer than you think it would be. The problem would be like, how good is the All-Star team defense? Yeah. Right? Is it as good? Because like, I don't think that the All-Star team offense would be good enough to really put a dent in UJ's defense. But the question would be, is the All-Star team defense as good as Clemson's? Probably. So I would say probably the All-Star team, but if I was answering the question seriously, but it is sort of a reflection of how the mighty have fallen that I'm having to think about it, because my default reaction would just be like, it's obviously the All-Star team, but I think it would actually be a pretty close game.
Yeah, I think so. Eric Gluckman, why was prevailing? Oh wait, hold on. Okay, this is a good question. Yeah, why was Eric Gluckman asks, why was prevailing wisdom that this would be a high-scoring football game? To me, it seemed obvious that two teams with oodles of defensive capability would play well, and two relatively unproven offenses in flux would exhibit exactly what we saw, especially in their first game.
Well, I think two things. One, despite what we saw out of these offenses, I think they both do have pretty high ceilings. I think there's a lot of talent on both sides. I don't think anyone expected Georgia's defense to be as good as it was in this first thing. In this first game, because you got to remember, as late as Thursday and Friday, there were real questions about like who was going to start at the cornerback positions. How was Keely Regan going to look? How was Latravius Brinney going to hold up? Who was like Latravius Brinney, like low key was one of the players of the game who was not in the front seven. So in that sense, I think it kind of makes sense, because I think we all expected good defensive showings, but I don't think we expected Georgia to do that.
Not like that.
My favorite description of that game from Georgia's defense was that, it was from Spencer Hall, was that it looked like a dog park that you had just thrown a tennis ball into on every snap. And it was just like 11 dudes just running around as fast as they can. All right, let's go to this first. This last question is my favorite.
This is hardly a question. It's more of a joke. P44 Haynes, one question. What time is it in Clemson?
10-3. Always. It's gonna be 250 for the rest of the year there.
Okay, well, let's get into our last couple segments. The first of the last two, Yara's Rage Against the Machine. This is going to be, as always, our lightning round, because it's our most chaotic segment. Thank you so much, Yara, for always sending all of these in one big text chain. And I hope you're enjoying your journey to college football. Love? Question mark? Not sure if it'll become love, but we'll see. Only time will tell. Ready? Not a question, but holy shit, we won, bro. That was awesome. I love football. I love Redcoats. Go Dogs. Sick 'em. Number two, have y'all seen that fire-ass pic of me screaming with the Sousa on my back? Because OML. Thank you. On my life. I look so badass.
I haven't. She does.
Very good.
They do.
Who are your top three players of the game and why?
I think it's got to be Jordan Davis, N'Kobe Dean, and then Christopher Smith. Yeah, is obviously the number one. Yeah.
What were your top three plays of the game and why?
It's the Christopher Smith. It's the Christopher Smith interception, and then pick two sacks that you like for your own flavor.
Go
aesthetically.
Wild. Tag yourself as a Mayo Classic moment. I'm either the really easy trivia or the Clemson dude eating mayo from the jar, like his damn life depended on it.
am the country singer who sang the national anthem, but actually started low enough to sing it as a baritone, which I really respect.
Give me a book rec for this week.
Okay, I have two. I have two. One would be Ursula K. Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness, which is about humans meeting an alien race, and it's like gender bendy, and it's like all about like what is identity, and like when you meet aliens, do our preconceived notions of gender and identity really matter? And two is the second one would be uh Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis series. The first of it is, I think, New Dawn, and it's also sometimes called Lilith's Brood. Octavia Butler, I think, is one of the best American authors ever, and she's not very well known in part because she's a black woman. But Xenogenesis, the series, is about humans meeting aliens and how they like evolve and how like what it means to be human. They're both very deeply transhumanist texts, and transhumanism is this really interesting philosophical idea about sort of like humans evolving past their current like meat state or whatever. And I think both of those would be right up your alley.
Based on what we saw at the Mayo Classic, what are your biggest predictions and thoughts about the upcoming home game?
We're gonna run like 50 times. It's gonna be a really fast game.
It is.
We're gonna get out of there in like 2.5 hours because we're gonna run the ball like 50 times. I'm not joking.
You don't think it's gonna be a game where they kind of try some things?
I mean,
out?
I think we're gonna air it out a little bit, but then I think we're gonna throw it probably at the beginning just to like get knock some rust off, especially if we can get if Keir Jackson or Blaylock come back. I think we want to get them worked into the rotation, get Burton worked into the rotation. But I do think once this team gets up like 17, 20 points, we're just going to run the ball like on the same 5 plays again and again and again.
What's something you wish somebody told you in college?
I wish. I mean, do you want to answer this one too? I think you have some.
I think they're just not. They're not the best years of your life. I mean, they can be.
Yeah.
But don't put that, like when you put things like that on a pedestal, it kind of dehumanizes.
You don't put the pressure. I wish somebody had told me to just like enjoy it.
Yeah.
Just like, and I enjoyed myself a lot in college, but I wish someone had told me like, hey, you don't have to. This doesn't have to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also wish someone had said like, to really just chase your enthusiasms. That's something that I didn't figure out. I kind of knew that in college, but I wish someone had told me like whatever the weird shit that you're into, like just do that. Push down the path of your enthusiasm as far as it will go, because like there's really no reason to get up in the morning if you don't have something like that.
Yeah.
At least for me.
Enthusiasm is attractive, to put it succinctly.
That's one of the Chapel Bell Curve Discord rules.
Yes. Enthusiasm is attractive. Chase your weird. Who's the MVP on the team right now in your opinion, and why?
I mean, I think it's got to be. It's Christopher Smith, but I mean, overall, I think if you want to like most impactful player, it's probably Nakobe Dean.
Yeah, Nakobe Dean
hit a really big game.
I would say. Are you a pumpkin spice person?
Yes.
Oh yes, absolutely. I'm basic, baby.
I'm an apple person too, but I love pumpkin spice.
Oh yeah. Dr. James Bearfield has sent in some questions between both himself and his wife. So here goes. Our Dr. James Bearfield Troll Corner presented by Cheerwine. It's the wine that gives you diabetes. Thank you. What is pass interference? Because I am very confused as to what constitutes it after this game.
I literally don't know. I have no idea.
How would you equate this game to the lottery paradox?
So basically, this is about like the lottery paradox. This is not what the lottery paradox would say it is, but it's basically a paradox about this like misleading statistics fallacy, right? The idea that like it's basically like a paradox about rationality, and the idea that like if you have a 1,000 ticket lottery with if you have a 1,000 ticket lottery with one winning ticket, then it's rational to accept that someone will win the lottery, and it has to do with like the rational acceptance, thought process, right? And it's basically like a logic puzzle. So I guess I would equate it to it because like rationally someone had to win this game and someone had to score enough points to win, and so
that is how that works.
When we had the pick six, that was I guess it.
Yeah. What was missing from the offense to get something going?
I mean, I don't think it's what was missing. It was who was missing.
Yeah, and explosive plays also. Yeah. Are you surprised that Mr. Sweeney, I'm saying Mr. Sweeney, essentially blamed the game on Ross by saying he ran the wrong route on the pick six?
All right, I'm trying not to get fired. Without making any comments about anyone else, I think it doesn't shock me because Dabo Swinney is fake. Yeah. He is a hypocrite, and he is fake.
That's a good answer. My wife's question: who would make a better stepdaddy, Rick or Kirby?
Obviously Rick, right? Like
I
Rick.
so go ahead, finish your thought.
Okay, well, who would make a better dad? I mean, I don't want to compare because that seems very personal, but like it's very
Stepdaddy,
clear
you can do
that,
it, yeah.
that Mark Rick is a great dad. But stepdad, it depends on like what is the basis on which we're saying a stepdad is good. Are we saying a stepdad is good if they perform all the duties of a dad, or are we saying a stepdad is good if he acts very much like a stepdad? Because if it's the second one, then it's definitely Kirby, because like he's got that like distant stepdad shit on lock.
Yeah, he does.
But if it's like who would just be who would be the more caring guy who would teach you life lessons because your dad wasn't around, that's Rick, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Are we following stepdaddy tropes? Or are we saying who would do the better role? For me, I think as someone who has a stepfather, I think I'd rather have Kirby because I know what he's about, and with Rick, I feel like I wouldn't trust him because he's too nice, and I'd be like, that just kind of give him the squinty eyes as often as possible, kind of thinking like, what are you actually after? What's going on with you? And he would tell me the same stuff every time, and it'd always be nice, and he'd follow through. But I still just wouldn't. Something would be off. But Kirby, I would know exactly what it was about. I feel like he has no issue telling me. Final question: equate this game to a poem.
All right, we're gonna do Emily Dickinson again.
Okay.
We're gonna do Emily Dickinson poem 269, which is Wild. It's often called Wild Nights. This is also, by the way, I don't want to get into like any Holmesian versus Watsonian analysis or whatever, but if you're asking for a formalist reason that I think Emily Dickinson was gay, it's this poem. Anyway, wild nights, were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the wind, stale heart and port, done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, the sea, might have but more tonight in thee. So yeah, I think it was a pretty wild night. That's why I picked it.
Wild nights.
Also, I want to just say out loud that I think Emily Dickinson was a lesbian, and like you're stupid if you don't. Anyway, carry on.
That's the show. We did the thing. Do you want to see us out?
Yeah, this has been Chapel Bell.